Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to talk about how I took Blenderguru's donut and incinerated it alive in Houdini. Cool. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's quickly dive into this. Everybody knows that if you're a Blender user, you know. Everybody knows. At this point, it's a rite of passage. It's basically physics for you to go through the donut tutorial that Blenderguru has created for beginners entering Blender. And I thought I'd take that concept and bring it to Houdini, in the sense that I'm trying to learn how to use these pyro simulations in Houdini, which are amazing. And I thought, okay, why don't we start with like burning a donut? So I took Blenderguru's donut and I'm gonna set it on fire. How do we do that? So first of all, I have set up a really simple scene here. It's just a background, the donut itself, camera, and a HDRI. That's it. There's a null here, which is just a parent of the background of the camera, and the null rotates, causing the background of the camera to rotate, giving the illusion that the donut is rotating. Cool, but how did we make the actual donut? Because that's the hard part, right? Well, let's dive into it. Okay, so over here my donut is on fire. That's the don't worry about that name right there. And let's also turn off hide other objects through this menu. You can just hide all this other stuff, which is, and over here you can see this really cool looking flaming smoking thing, and it looks like this because of the last node. So I'm just gonna organize the nodes here. We'll get into it, but just to make sure it looks a little okay, let's just, which looks like this. There we go. Since this is a relatively beginner pyro simulation, I'm not going to get into too much of the weeds here, but I'm also not going to explain it that well for a complete beginner. If you've never done a pyro simulation, this video is probably not going to teach you how to do it, but it might give you an inspiration on getting started. But if you did want to watch an in-depth tutorial, I highly recommend the channel Bubble Pins, who has a couple of videos explaining the pyro simulation in great detail and really well. Cool. Now let's dive into how I created it. Everything here starts with a circle. Nothing crazy about this, just the radius is set to 7, division set to 43, so that I can have a little bit more resolution. And then what I did was I resampled it. That's it. Okay, really simple. We sampled it. I reduced the length a little bit just to get more points. The actual divisions don't matter here because I'm resampling it here. And I make sure that it's subdivision curved so that when it resamples, it smoothens the shape. And I also enable this curve view, but I don't think I used it. But it's always fun to enable this curve view attribute. So far that's all we've got. Then this kind of branches out into 3 groups. Now, don't you mind this one? This was an experiment that failed, so you just forget about that. Just pretend that doesn't exist. What you need to worry about is these 3 sections. This is where all the magic happens. So essentially, we have 3 things here. So basically what a pyro simulation is basically, it's a simulation that works with volumes. It's like a fluid simulation of volumes. It works with volumes, and it takes in some inputs. It starts with some basic inputs like density, temperature, burn rate, and a few other inputs like simple stuff. And it basically takes this. So density is basically the smoke, and burn is the actual fire that's burning. You can also add in like fuel, and you can also add the temperature. Okay, and these things work inside the pyro solver. The pyro solver understands what these are, and it'll make them behave like they would in real life to whatever extent. And then you can add your own kind of effects and various forces to affect the pyro solver. The way I've done it is it always starts with a source. So you've got to feed in a source. So basically the way it works is, over here I have a source which is going to generate a lot of the pyro stuff, and then we have something called a sink source, which is another type of parameter that pyro solver needs. It doesn't need, but it helps in this particular situation. I'll explain why. Velocity field, which I will I will explain as well. Let's start with the pop source. Okay, so this is really simple. All I did was I took this line, which this circle which I resampled, and I converted it to a line. And once I've converted it to a line, I use a polywire node, and the polywire node will just basically take a line and it'll convert it into like a pipe. That's pretty much what it does. And if I press P over here, okay, you can see here that the polywire has some settings: the wire radius, which is the thickness of this pipe thingy, and the divisions, how many like lines. Like this, for example, if I just really increase this to like 9, you can see this changing. So I made this 8. I don't need a lot. I just needed these points in sort of a tube shape. That's really what I needed. And then what I do is I transform this. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually, if I would just scrub through this, you can see that it starts at a really low value, and then it starts expanding until it reaches a level of 1. And this is just an animation because the Pyro solver is based on this animation. Okay, and then what we do is we use a pop net. Let's look at the pop net. Let's not dive in, but let's just play it. You can see here, this is what's happening. So let's just disable this or enable this so you can see better. Or in fact, let's do it this way. So you can see this is the pop net. So basically what I'm doing is I'm generating particles from this thing, and I'm basically advecting. The word is advecting, which is basically I'm moving them through a velocity field, which is changing their velocity as they move through, and it forces them to do this. So you can see here a few things. This is not perfect. The first thing you can see is that the velocity field is basically causing the particles to sort of swirl around the ring, the torus shape. In addition to that, you can see some noisy movement. You can see here the particles are kind of moving in like random noisy movements, so like a typical curl noise kind of effect. And that's it. And then once they reach sort of the edges, they kind of get stuck, and it's just a noisy movement that's moving them. That's kind of cool, I guess, but it's not really what I intended, but it just so happened to look that way, and I kind of like the effect, so I kept it. And then I cache this out. Now I'm gonna dive into this. Okay, before we cache it out, we're just gonna dive into it, and we're gonna look at this. Right, this solution is really simple. First of all, I don't do any settings here. This is what we had in the beginning, and then I just changed the birth rate to 10,000 particles, okay, per frame. And then I changed this life expectancy with an animation over here, so it starts at like 1 life expectancy, and then it starts animating up to this point, and immediately the expectancy increases to 100. So any particles generated after this time frame will live for 100 seconds. And the reason I do that is because I don't want the particles here when it's growing to live for too long. They just accumulate too much in the center, and I don't like that. So I keyframe the life expectancy so they die off, and then the balance kind of forms the donut shape, which is kind of cool. I also use, I'm gonna get to this pop advect in a moment, okay, but I use a pop force, okay, which basically adds the large sort of curl motions. And then I also use another pop force which adds smaller motions, and then I just add a pop drag and reduce the air resistance to 0.1, and this kind of slows everything down a little bit, and because of it kind of makes it behave more naturally because there's air resistance, and that looks more natural. Okay, but let's talk about this pop advect by volumes. This is what's really causing most of this shape. If I would just disable this, you'll see it looks totally different. Okay, it's just going all over the place. This is the other noise that we have. Okay, so really the advect by volumes, that's what's really causing this donut shaped movement. And the way I've done this, so this is basically a node that takes a volume that has information, and it advects the particles based on that. Okay, if you select this, you can choose a source. In this case, I am choosing a sub source and I'm pasting the sub, which is basically the null on the velocity field, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I'm taking the V field from that, which is the velocity field. I'm scaling it considerably, and I'm setting the advection type to update velocity, and I'm setting the method to trace. That's it. I feel like that kind of worked. The other methods kind of didn't work for me as well as I'd liked. And that's it. There's nothing else going on with pop advect, and this is the most important part. So I kind of cast this out because I need this for the next stage. So I don't want this to be calculating. I wanted this to be loaded from memory. And we're going to talk real quick about this pop advect by volumes, and I'm going to show you how I got this volume in a minute, but we just cache this out. Now I'll continue this after I talk to you about the volumes. Okay, let's zoom out a little bit and let's go to the vector field, which is down here. And the vector field is pretty much generated through the same stream. This took me a while to understand, and if you want to learn more, you can definitely follow this guy called Rockside on YouTube. He has his own courses as well, super amazing courses. So what we have here is we have something called a polyframe. Okay, and the polyframe is a thing that allows you to sort of adjust like the normals and things. Basically what the polyframe does is it allows us to sort of adjust certain attributes on the points. For example, I'm adjusting the attributes on the points, and I'm choosing this style called first edge. So this is basically, it's gonna cause the normal or these other values to sort of point from one point to the next point, something like that. Okay, and then I'm disabling the normal, which we don't need. We have something called tangent. The tangent is basically from this point to this point, what's the tangent, this point to this point, what's the tangent, and so on, right? So that's what the first edge tangent name is, and we just named this dir, okay, for direction. And the reason why we named this dir is because we want these points. Now I can visualize this. If I was to click here and click on the dir, you can immediately sort of see the visual representation of the dir. If I was to right click here, click on this dir, this is the visualizer, and it allows me to sort of adjust it. As you can see, the dir is kind of pointing in this direction, okay, for every single one, and it's just creating this circular motion. So we can kind of extend this a little bit, and we can see that we're like pointing in the direction of the circle. That's what the dir is. Great. That's really useful because we have this sort of direction this way. In addition to that, I also create another circle, and this circle is basically, I use a parameter that basically says take this circle's radius and divide it by 7 and get that size. So in this case it's 7, this size is 1. Why did I do that? Because I just wanted a smaller circle to define the sort of inner section of the donut. And then I use a resample for this as well, just to increase the resolution. And then I use my beloved sweep node, which allows me to, so when I said the intersection, I meant like the cross section of this torus shape. And we create this sweep node, which allows me to create the circular shape. Then what I've done next is very important. When we created this circular shape, because the sweep node allows us to take all the attributes, unless we specifically say don't take it. So in this particular case it says everything excluding these values from the back nodes, right? Yeah, so it says what from the input inherit everything excluding the so this input is the backbone curve, which is basically another circle. It's inheriting everything, this star, except for, this is like except for p and blah 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 blah. And then remember that on this particular thing we also have the dir, which is included, it is inherited by the sweep node. So if I were to look at the sweep node, you can see that dir is here. So if I were to visualize it, you can actually see that every single point has a dir, which is pointing in the direction of the donut shape. Awesome. This is really useful. So we have like a vector that points in the donut shape direction. Then what we do is we give the object its normals, okay, point normals in particular. We just say normal, compute normals, add to points, and we get these. And if I display the normals using this button right here, you can see it's now pointing directly outside of the surface on every single point. let me simultaneously display the dir as well. So you can see now we have a point. For every single point, we have a vector that points outward like this, and perpendicular to that, we have another vector that points along the surface. Now this is where all the magic happens, because this is where we have two directions that will help us try to figure out what is the sort of like make a vector field that will sort of point in a swirling direction around this circle like this, as well as go along the donut. And that's what gives the pop advect shapes. If you notice how they kind of swirl, and not only do they swirl around the donut shape, but they also swirl around and continue moving slowly. And that's where we get this from. What I did was I dropped a attribute warp. Again, I created a simple system. So this system is what I learned from Walkside. Butchered his name right there. And it's an amazing system, right? Because it helps you sort of figure out the direction. What I'm doing here is I'm taking my normal value over here from the geometry, and then I'm binding. So if you want to bring in an attribute that isn't given here, you use a bind. You put a bind and you just type the name of the attribute and the type of the attribute, and you can access it. So we already know we have a dir on this geometry, and we have the normal, which is pointing outward. So we have this vector and this vector, and then we use something called the cross product. Now the cross product is a mathematical vector function, which basically will tell you, well, if you have a vector pointing this direction and a vector pointing that direction, it will now tell you what is the vector pointing this direction. This is crazy useful. And to visualize this, I'm just gonna show you this. Okay, and I'm also gonna reduce this because this is crazy big. Okay, do you see this? The green line, okay, which I'm just gonna shake around a little bit. Okay, this green line right here, this is pointing in the like perpendicular to both of these vectors. So that's how you use the cross product. Now this is an insanely powerful function that allows us to do a lot of things. Now we can kind of control the direction. So then what I did was another pretty genius move from Walkside. I took this mix node and I simply mixed the dir, which is that direction, which is along the shape, with the cross product, which is basically the green line, which is sort of around the donut shape or torus. Mixed at about 75%, so basically 75% of one over the other, and then I just normalized that, and then I set that to the velocity field. Okay, so let me just show you what that looks like. Right, I'm just going to disable all of this. If I were to just enable the velocity field, you can see that the velocity field is sort of pointing upward in that kind of direction. So you can imagine a particle coming through here will just sort of swirl in this direction, move upward, and then from here it'll move upward and upward and upward, and it'll keep moving along this way as well as upward. It's just that it's moving a lot more along than it is upward. That's because of the mix percentage. We can change this if we like. We can sort of, 0% around or 100% around, or somewhere in between, and in my case I decided 0.75 is the best one. Okay, so that's everything in the attribute WAP. I don't think there's anything else. So that's the sort of vector direction, and this is a major aspect of creating the vector field. Okay, so we have this vector on every point, and then I subdivide this, which will basically inherit all the vectors for every point. And then what we do is we're going to start to create the vector field. And what a vector field is basically, well, it's a volume that has these vectors. Okay, what we do is we enable something called a bound. This is a node that will take the bounds of the object. It'll just take the bounds of the object. Okay, so if I was to just show this and template the bounds instead, you can see the bounds of the object. And then I added some padding, so it's just sort of padding this side, that side, the top, bottom. Okay, and this padding sort of helps with giving some space for this vector field. And then what I'm doing is I'm converting this bound, which is a solid object, by the way, okay, into a VDB from polygons. I'm converting it to a VDB, and specifically a fog VDB. And then what I'm doing is I'm taking this scatter node and I'm scattering points all over. And the reason why you need this fog VDB is otherwise it'll scatter on the surface, which is not what we want. We want to scatter within the surface as well, because we want points all over this volume. And then what we do is we take this scattered volume and we put it into an attribute warp. Okay, just like earlier, an attribute warp here, another attribute warp here, and we take the original object and we plug that into this second input. Okay, so let's look at this attribute warp. What the attribute warp is doing, so it's basically, I use something called a point cloud open, which you could think of it as, if you remember here, I plugged in this object into the second input, and this one is essentially a point cloud. Okay, so it takes this point cloud open allows me to sample this point cloud based on some information. So for example, I take this points, which is every point on the point cloud, and I put it into the points position of the point cloud open, and then a file is basically the output point. So I'm sampling this based on something, and what is that something? For that something I need to use a point cloud filter, and I'm sampling it based on the channel V, which is velocity, which is taken from this file. So I'm sampling the velocity at this point for the point cloud open, and I'm applying it to the points. So that's what this does. And there's probably better ways of doing this, and there are different ways. It's just that this is the kind of easiest way to get this result. But you may not get the result you're looking for if you don't increase the search radius. So that's important. You've got to increase the search radius, otherwise it's not going to apply the velocity. And if you just go in here and you can see when I increase the velocity lines, you can kind of faintly see. In fact, let's kind of make this background dark, easier to see. Oh, there we go. And turn off the grid. Okay, you can see the little green lines. Okay, these green lines, these are the velocities. And if I go to the side, you can kind of start to see that this is a swirling motion. It's creating this swirling motion in the donut shape. But this won't work if your search radius is really small. Okay, it's trying to search within this area, and you can increase this further if you like. I probably should have done that actually, but it's alright. Okay, so basically I'm creating this velocity field. Okay, and then what I'm doing is I'm feeding this back into the velocity. This velocity is of the point cloud. Okay, so the point cloud is inheriting the filtered velocity. Cool. I sort of blur this attribute. I use an attribute blur to sort of blur this effect. You can kind of see the effect here. It just blurs it a bit more. 100 blurring iterations and volume preserving, because if you use Laplace, it kind of ruins it a bit. So I use this so I can get more of the effect. And then I plug this into another attribute warp. Okay, well, this one I could have just done in the first one, but I thought I'll do it after the blur. Okay, and I just normalize. I just wanted to normalize. I didn't have to do this in the attribute blur warp. I could have done this in a wrangle, but whatever. And then I use a totally new node, which is called the volume rasterized attributes. And this is a node I learned about only after I started the Pyro simulations. And volume rasterized attributes is basically something that will create a volume, okay, based on attributes. So if I were to show this, what's this? This is a volume that's based on the V attribute, which is this velocity. Okay, and it kind of looks like this. So it's basically a volume representation of this vector field. That's what this volume rasterized does. And this vector velocity field, not vector field, velocity field, gets plugged into the pop advect by volumes. Okay, and I take the VR that for the field, and this gives us sort of an effect like this, and you can see the velocities sort of with the visualizer. Very cool, very cool. Now we can move on from here. So I remember I told you I cache this out because I'm using this in the next stage, and to help along with that, I just delete everything except the P and the V. I don't think I needed anything more than that. Everything else is unnecessary. And I fed that into the Pyro source. The reason I deleted everything is because I felt like it might speed things up if I deleted everything. So it has all these attributes that we don't need. I can show you over here. The 25 point attributes, whereas over here it's just 2. Okay, so that saves up a lot of data. And then I fed this into the Pyro source. Now the Pyro source is the first real sort of Pyro kind of node. Okay, and this is basically a node that will just add attributes. That's all it's going to do. Okay, so you can see here it has something called initialize, and you can initialize the source, burn, smoke, color, fuel. You can even initialize other custom variables if you'd like by adding from here. Okay, so this will basically kind of create the Pyro source, okay, on this object. Okay, and here you can define like the particle scale and size and stuff like that, and it'll just add these sort of attributes. So here I'm adding the burn and the temperature because I want the thing to kind of burn. It also adds automatically the P scale, which is based on the particle scale multiplied by the particle separation. And this information can be fed into the volume rasterize attributes, which gives this again the same node we used there. And here I just set the voxel. First of all, I set it based on the attributes burn and temperature both, and I set the voxel size to 0.2 and the particle size to this much, and that's it. And if you just scrub through the timeline, you can immediately see that something's happening. The volume is kind of evolving, which is really cool. And this represents the burn and the temperature. Now the burn is basically the fire burning, and the temperature is the fire and the smoke rising, and also where the burn would be the most intense. At this point it's just everything is the same because there's no real difference between these two. But if you wanted to get really crazy, you don't have to use the Pyro source. You can generate these two things separately and add noise and even more stuff. I didn't do that this time, but that would probably be a bad idea. Okay, and then we merge that here. Okay, we want to feed that into the Pyro solver, but we don't just want to add that. We also want to add a few other things. We also want to add, actually, let me kind of show you what happens if I did feed that into the Pyro solver. Okay, I'm just going to reduce the sort of resolution of the Pyro solver and just show you what it looks like. So this is basically what it looks like. Kind of boring actually, just a kind of sphere which is on fire. Actually, it's not too bad, it's kind of interesting too. But there's no movement of the flames. It's just catching fire and going up. No big deal. Anybody can do that. Okay. What I'm doing here is I'm also adding the velocity field that I made here into this thing, and I'm just doing it by merging it in. That's it. Now look what happens just by adding that. Immediately things start to look a lot crazier and a lot more interesting, and this makes things way cooler. But the problem with this method is when I increase the resolution too much, I found that the hole in the middle kind of gets blocked too much by the flame and the smoke and stuff. So that's why I add this one in. Okay, this one kind of cleans up the center a bit faster and a bit more, and the reason why it does this is because this adds a new attribute called the sync. So basically I just stole this convert line, I transformed it by making it a bit smaller, like 0.75% smaller. I filled it, and then I extruded it, and then I add this transform, which is basically has a channel on it, which is the extrude distance divided by 2, so that it kind of extrudes sort of in the middle. So instead of being like this, it kind of extrudes in both directions. And then I just put a fuse here because I thought that there was more points unnecessarily. And then I add a Pyro source here, which basically adds the sync value attribute. It's a custom attribute, and I just scatter it on the surface, and that's it. And then I add an attribute noise onto this, and I just noise up the sync a little bit, and you could see that the sync kind of got a little noisier. Okay, it's not just pure one everywhere. Okay, and then I rasterized this as well. Okay, and that's what creates this kind of effect. And I fed this in, and this kind of eats up. And basically what the sync does, okay, and the sync is kind of sourced into the Pyro solver, and you have to manually do that with the sourcing. You have to kind of go in, press this plus, and you go in and you put the operation mode to subtract, so it removes stuff. The sync is the source volume, and it's removing density, flames, and temperature, everything. So it removes everything from the center, and that's the sync. We could probably even increase the sort of effect if we wanted to. We could probably see even more of an effect. Yeah, there we go. Pretty cool. And if we increase the resolution, that's what we're gonna see. So but I've already cached out the simulation after I did that, and at the high resolution, this is what you get. Pretty cool. And then we just add in the Pyro bake volume and just adjust some of the parameters here just to get the right look, and it dramatically improves the colors and things like that. And I think I'll explain all of this stuff a bit later, but when I have a better understanding of all of it. But once you play around with this, you can really get a nice look. And that's it. And that's the whole method in which I burnt the donut alive. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.